let me see if I answered all your questions. As far as it being a cult or a sham, well, they obviously pay no attention. Cults don't have large bodies of work. Cults exist as small versions of religion that get together and have lip service to something and don't do anything. Obviously, we're in an educational period, but we have a goal that we want to move toward. It can't be a cult. If anyone says it's a cult, say cults don't have goals. They really don't. Cults have this floaty propensity to pontificate on certain things, and they don't move anywhere. So a functional resource-based economy where we want to move into the structure has no resemblance of a cult. We're not even really philosophical. We're actually anti-philosophical in the movement. We want to base everything on tangible relationships to the environment and physical reference. So all the attributes that would say that it's cultish or whatever, those are so easy to blow off. And generally speaking, don't even waste your time on people that have nothing better than to say things like that.
I could understand how you'd be curious. I mean, you walk in and you go, what is it? What is this place?
Walking to a Church of Scientology is very much a new kind of experience.
It's not like a church that I was used to walking into, you know. It's very modern looking, you know, very, very clean. You know, it was a very friendly atmosphere.
People come in every day, all the time. Just walking in. Hey, what is this? What is this place? I'd like...
And indeed, the techniques of Dianetics provided the means by which practitioners soon began discovering past lives. Pressing application and research even further came the accomplishment of what is known as exteriorization, demonstrating the spirit was indeed separable from the body and mind. The Scientology religion was born. Thereafter, L. Ron Hubbard delved ever deeper into the spiritual nature of man, documenting his discoveries in thousands of recorded lectures, articles, and books. While to present those discoveries, he literally circumnavigated the globe, and so churches of Scientology opened on 4 continents, headquartered at his long-term residence in southern England. Through ensuing years, L. Ron Hubbard continued advancing the subject until his passing in 1986. His legacy comprises tens of millions of published words and 3,000 recorded lectures. While with over 250 million copies of his books and lectures in circulation, he has inspired a movement spanning all continents and all cultures.
From the Affidavit of Lawrence Brennan. I have written hundreds of orders, issues, programs, and other writings to forward the religious cloaking of Scientology, all under either Hubbard or Miscavige's orders, or in an attempt to make doable what Hubbard wrote in his policies. I am the primary writer of all of the legal rudiments programs of organized Scientology that were enforced around the world for years. I am the only person who has worked at the highest levels of organized Scientology, dealing with such matters both during the reign of the Guardian's Office and afterwards when the Office of Special Affairs was formed. I have more factual and legal knowledge of the history of organized Scientology's corporate, tax, and other legal matters outside the courts from the 1970s through early 1984 than any single person currently in organized Scientology or outside of SANE. I believe that I have more knowledge of actions taken by organized Scientology to develop a religious cloaking and why it was done than anyone else currently in organized Scientology. Additionally, I have intimate and detailed knowledge of the creation of much of the current corporate and other legal structure of organized Scientology, as well as what David Miscavige and L. Ron Hubbard had to do with it. I have reason to believe that organized Scientology will try to prevent me from giving such details, including possibly physical harm to myself. Thus, I wish to make one thing clear now. I am of sound mind and happy in my life, and look forward to living many more years of life. I have no desire to commit suicide. Should I die and it appear that I committed suicide, I wish to point out I would never do that, and I would wish to request an investigation into organized Scientology and Miscavige as potentially being behind my death. The Cloak of Religion. Religious cloaking was intentionally used to help organized Scientology make money and to avoid compliance with the myriad of laws that would otherwise apply if it was not so considered. It was determined that the only way to handle many of the legal matters in front of us and still apply Hubbard's policies that had to do with staff, ethics, sales of services, money, delivery of services, and the like, was to develop and use a religious cloaking, saying Scientology was a religion, its services religious, its staff members of religious orders, and the like. In developing the religious cloaking for organized Scientology, the following were considered a few of the benefits so that Hubbard policies could be applied. Minimum wages would not have to be paid. Standard employee rights, such as those found in laws like the Fair Labor Standards Act, could be discarded, and thus Hubbard policies, including such things as ethics conditions, the Rehabilitation Project Force, and the like, could be applied without outside interference. The treatment of public Scientologists and the use of their funds would be considered outside the purview of governmental bodies. Couching the demand for and flow of monies within organized Scientology using, quote, religious terms, such as by saying that clear-cut mandatory payments for services were fixed donations and were mandated by the scripture of exchange, was hoped to cut off attempts by governments and others to look into them further. What was considered one of the most important reasons for the religious cloaking was so that the services of Dianetics and Scientology could be delivered without it being considered the practice of psychology and or medicine. It was feared that unless there was a religious cloaking developed and used throughout organized Scientology, that its practices would be outlawed in many parts of the world. The use of scholars to say Scientology was a religion or organized Scientology was a religious organization was carefully planned and executed to forward the cover of religious cloaking. Once religious cloaking was begun in earnest, and many self-serving documents were made and images created to reflect a religious image, it was considered vital to get, quote, experts to support the concept that organized Scientology was in fact an organized religion, its policies, quote, religious scripture, etc. The entire intention behind the acquisition and use of such religious and legal scholars was to create and develop, quote, evidence to support the religious cloaking that could be used in courts and elsewhere where needed. I worked on the obtainment of such scholars' opinions personally and by supervising others to do same, and I used such scholars' opinions to obtain recognitions that organized Scientology would not otherwise have obtained. At no point were any scholars briefed on either the real controls of organized Scientology or the reasons why religious cloaking was developed. Instead, they tended to be briefed using the religious cloaking materials developed and or by speaking with pre-qualified, briefed Scientologists who were told what to tell the scholars. Two of the things that organized Scientology felt were of the most importance in order to avoid compliance with many laws that were contrary to Hubbard policy were the religious cloaking and the corporate restructuring to make it very difficult, if not impossible, for outsiders to ever get to the main assets of organized Scientology, and to ensure that the real leaders of organized Scientology could be insulated from legal liability by hiding their real controls behind a myriad of corporate and other legal veils. It was considered both a defensive and offensive strategy to have such cloaking, religious and corporate, in place. Defensively, it makes it very difficult for individuals or even governments to force legal compliance of the many types of laws as covered above. It also makes it almost impossible to hold those that really control organized Scientology responsible legally, or to get to the financial assets of organized Scientology spread out around the world. Offensively, it gives organized Scientology a safe base from which to attack critics and or anyone it feels is its enemy. Hiding behind religious cloaking and corporate veils, it can act as a victim when people point out its crimes and injustices, calling them, quote, religious bigots, and even scaring governments, many of whom are not supposed to get involved with religious matters. By calling policies by Hubbard or Miscavige that are otherwise abusive or contrary to law religious scripture, it was hoped to avoid legal scrutiny of same. Much has been done under Miscavige to hide the truth, including the vetting or destruction of files that showed Hubbard and he was in control. This was similar to the mass vetting and removal of files throughout the Guardian's office after the FBI raids in the late 1970s to hide the fact that Hubbard was really running the Guardian's office. Miscavige constantly ordered cover-ups of the truth, even extending to the killing of a biography on L. Ron Hubbard written by Omar Garrison, which Miscavige wanted destroyed as it contained embarrassing truths about Hubbard. Countless abuses have been carried out by Miscavige and the people he controls in the Office of Special Affairs after he was able to hide behind those corporate veils and religious cloaking. This includes the examples of Miscavige spitting on and beating top organized Scientology executives in late '82. There are a number of people who have now gone public telling of Miscavige's beatings and other abuses of others since I first posted this over a year ago. These will show a pattern of brutality and control over decades by Miscavige over organized Scientology, which in turn will show his statements that he did not run organized Scientology under penalty of perjury to be false. In at least 1982 and 1983, Miscavige also ran a new unit of organized Scientology called the Internal Finance Police. Miscavige gave orders for them to carry out many abuses of others to, quote, find and handle alleged, quote, financial crimes against Hubbard and Scientology. They had a mission to actually get people jailed for financial crimes against Scientology. It did not even matter if the person was innocent. They just wanted examples. And a financial crime was anything at all that Hubbard, Miscavige considered took money away from organizations of Scientology, and thus to Hubbard management as well. Their methods of threats, physical abuse, screaming, quote, gang-bang sack checks, and the like were used against anyone and everyone who Miscavige considered were financially, quote, ripping off Scientology organizations or Hubbard. The true danger lurking behind those corporate veils and hidden behind religious cloaking is organized Scientology's intention to control the legal systems and educational systems of the world, to rid the world of its enemies, and to apply its brutal ethics policies to everyone. That is what is in store for the world should the policies of organized Scientology be applied throughout the world. It has long been the intention of organized Scientology to do the above as it uses its front groups like Narconon, Applied Scholastics, the Way to Happiness Foundation, etc. to get inroads into society for organized Scientology.
We live in turbulent times. Each day witnesses a seemingly endless succession of human suffering, from natural disasters to those brought about by man. But what about the everyday catastrophes that don't make the headlines? Families caught in the turmoil of divorce, or students facing failure in school, people struggling with problems on the job, or loved ones coping with the hopelessness of addiction. Whatever the disaster, large or small, there are those who are there to help. Those who have the courage, commitment, and knowledge to go out and do something about it. Such a group is the Scientology Volunteer Ministers. The Volunteer Ministers are a global force of volunteers, tens of thousands strong. Active in more than 50 nations, linked through a worldwide network of chapters, they are today one of the largest relief organizations on Earth. In Australia, CCHR exposed a deadly psychiatric practice called deep sleep therapy, wherein patients were placed in a drugged coma and electroshocked. Not only was it done without their consent, 48 patients died during the treatment. CCHR fought on behalf of victims until the hospital was shut down and many were compensated and deep sleep banned. Dianetics, the Evolution of a Science, is L. Ron Hubbard's own story of how he arrived at his discovery of the reactive mind, the hidden source of your worries, upsets, and insecurity. Dianetics, the Evolution of a Science, contains the account of how
So all the attributes that would say that it's cultish or whatever, those are so easy to blow off. And generally speaking, don't even waste your time on people that have nothing better than to say things like that. Seriously, I get a lot of people that they find one website and they get obsessed about it because it's just a website, and they feed into it. Don't feed into any of the groups out there that are against what we're doing, that have websites. Just don't feed into it. If someone comes to the forum post and posts these things, ignore it, and we'll just get rid of it. If you see a website and it's against everything, don't post contrary things. Just ignore it, because the more you feed into it, the more you antagonize, the more you try to reason, the more interest is generated, the more people get on their high horse, and the more dogmatic, believe me, the more dogmatic things become. You're not going to turn people around that have such a blind disposition at this point. They do it for many other personal reasons. If someone didn't like the religious section of my first film, and there's all sorts of crazy people out there that just are, and I say that very literally, there are some absolute batshit crazy people out there I get emails from that have posted websites that I'm terrified of. And people wonder why I don't talk about my last name, because these people scare the shit out of me. I'm not kidding. I'm not hesitant to point that out. I have had my share of run-ins with this extreme psychosis that this society perpetuates, and there's always a degree of protectionism, but nevertheless, that's an aside. When it comes to these people that have nothing better to do than to call us a sham, a cult, or just looking for money, ignore them and move on.